How to stop overworking your watercolor paintings. That's what we're going to talk about in today's video. Welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, my name is Michelle, and on this channel we do all things watercolor, as well as drawing tutorials, color mixing, even a little bit of mixed media and business motivation for artists too. Please do consider subscribing. If you click the bell icon, you'll get notified every time I have a new video for you. I make at least one free video here a week on YouTube, and it's free to subscribe. So just before we start today, YouTube sent me this. So I'm not going to do an unboxing video because really, you don't want to be watching a middle-aged woman taking something out of a piece of cardboard. If you like watching unboxing, you can always go to your supermarket late at night. They do lots of it. But I'm going to quickly open it and see what's in it. And the question is, do I move the sword? Or do I keep the sword? Because I really do like the sword. I only placed it there when my friend Amanda bought it for me for Christmas, but the wood matches the mantelpiece perfectly. It's easily accessible, unlike my metal sword, which is upstairs. What to do, that is the question. Okay, so shiny and pretty as it is, I've already dropped it on the floor once and it hit something quite solid. I didn't damage it, but it's only a matter of time. It's got some hanging hooks on the back. I'm going to have to actually fix it to something because it's really, really unstable. So for now, the sword wins. So enough nonsense for one video. Let's talk about overworking watercolors and what it is and what it isn't. Now, a lot of people will say that overworking is working on a piece too long, past the point where you should have stopped. But the question is, where is that point? And I've also heard people say that it's a painting with too much detail. It's a painting that's had too many layers. I'm not sure that's actually right. So I'm going to point the camera down for a moment and I'm going to show you a couple of pieces of art. One is my own and one is someone else's. So we're going to talk about, first of all, what isn't overworking. Then we're going to talk about what is overworking. And then I'm going to give you 10 practical tips that are going to help you to stop overworking your own paintings. So this one isn't mine. This is a book I've got. It's Sandrine. I never know how to say her surname. I know she's French. It's spelt Morgi or Morgi or Morhi. I'm not sure. It's got a G in, whether that's a soft or a hard G. I'm not sure. She's a botanical artist. Now, no one takes longer over paintings and puts more layers on than botanical artists. So look at this picture here of the hydrangeas, and she actually shows her process for going through this. You can see all of these stages of adding all of these layers and all these little details. And yet, when we look at the finished effect, we wouldn't call it overworked because it's still bright and fresh and clear. So let me show you one of my own paintings. Now, not all of my own paintings are highly detailed. They tend to be. I don't have a realistic style or even what I would call a botanical style. I like to describe my style as stylistic, really. I tend to get lost in things like pattern. So I've got a portrait I did here. Move this. It's a large painting, so I'll try and get it on screen. So I'll move it up so you can see the bottom part, and then down here so we can see it's an Indian lady and it's got a bokeh background. Now, this painting took me many, many hours. It's watercolor with a little gouache. The skin alone, I layered the skin tones so many times. I scrubbed things out, I put things back in, I adjusted and I painted and I overpainted. And yet, I don't think you would call this painting overworked. Now, you may not like my painting, you may not like Sandrine's painting. That's not the point, because whether you like a painting style or not is simply a matter of personal preference. I simply wanted to show you a couple of highly detailed, highly layered paintings that I feel are still not overworked. So if overworking isn't simply a matter of how long you spend on a painting, then what is it? Now, to me, the word that always comes into my head with overworking is scruffy. So to me, it denotes a painting that's been worked on too many times. Maybe it's had too many mistakes scrubbed out. Perhaps the colours have been adjusted too many times. It's certainly a painting that's lost freshness. Because sometimes you may get to a point with your painting where everything's looking fresh and bright and you feel like you don't want to go any further with it, but you're quite sure that it needs something extra. The painting isn't actually finished at that point, but yet when you give the painting that extra stuff, it ends up looking overworked. So I'm going to give you strategies in this video, and we're going to figure out some things that are causing overworking and how you can easily stop them. So let's get started with tip number 1. So my first tip has to do with how much you draw at the start of your painting. Now, you know I'm a big advocate for drawing, and I do believe that you should have at least some basic layout when you start your painting. But yet too much drawing, indeed too much scruffy pencil on the paper, can contribute to a look of overworking, and it can also persuade you to put more detail in than perhaps you need. So how much should you draw at the beginning? Basically, you need to lay out the bare bones. For instance, if there's a brick wall in the picture, you can draw the wall, but I wouldn't draw every brick. Now, I think the one thing that people get wrong about drawing and paintings is thinking that they have to do all the drawing at the start of the painting. I always draw as I go through the painting. This has many advantages. You can get to the point where you paint that brick wall and think to yourself, do I need to draw all the bricks in now? You may have already put an underwash on it, and this is great because what you're doing then is you're putting pencil on top of a dry underwash. It'll erase much more easily, and you're then only looking at drawing the amount of bricks you need. Maybe you do need to draw every brick for that particular painting. Maybe you don't need to draw any bricks, and maybe you just need to draw a few of the bricks. But leaving the more detailed areas to draw as you go through the painting is a really great habit to get into. It stops the pencil being trapped under too many layers of paint. It gives you the option to draw or not draw detail as you need it when you go through the painting. It keeps your paper cleaner, it keeps your paint fresher, and this can be quite important. It stops you becoming overwhelmed and painting in the wrong areas because, as I mentioned earlier, mistakes can be the cause of scrubbing out and overworking. And if you draw too much detail, I'm particularly thinking of things like gardens and botanical subjects where you've got flowers and petals and leaves everywhere. If you do too much drawing at the beginning, you can find that you accidentally paint something the wrong colour. I've done this. I've painted what I thought was a rose petal and then realised actually it's one of the leaves. Then what have I got? I've got a pink area that I have to overpaint with green. That's going to dull my colour. Or maybe I'm going to try and scrub it out. That's going to contribute to overworking. So do draw at the beginning, but draw as little as you need to make sure you've got everything in the right place. And then draw detail as you go through on dry areas of paint only if you need to. So tip number 2 relates to the first one, and that's to get your composition right and get everything in the right place so that you are 100% happy with it before you start to paint. Now, another strategy that you might want to think about, if you're not really sure if your drawing's going to be okay, if you're going to get things in the right place, then although I do suggest you practice your drawing, what you might want to do is draw separately. And then when you've got your composition correct, you can move things across, trace or use trace down paper to get things onto your final piece of watercolor paper. This is going to mean that you don't have lots of erasing, because erasing can smudge greasy pencil all across the paper. It can damage the surface of the paper, meaning the layers of paint don't sit very nicely on it. You might have some marks show up once you start to paint. All of this contributes to the idea of overworking. And one of the main things we need to avoid with overworking is making mistakes and having to overly correct mistakes. As we know with watercolor, this nearly always shows. I've seen people so often start painting a picture and then say, oh, I really don't like that figure there in the foreground now. I think it's too large. I'm going to try and move it. These are not decisions you should be making as you go through your painting. Of course, there are always some areas that you need to adjust, but you don't want to be adjusting these main elements. You don't want to be actually moving objects around or redrawing objects. Get all of that right at the beginning, and if you think you're going to need a few goes, then draw on a separate piece of paper and trace your work across to your final painting area. One of the other main things that contributes to overworking is messing around with colours, not getting your colours right, endlessly trying to adjust colours and rework them. And even just having a huge disjointed selection of colours, it's always good to work within a limited palette. I don't mean that every painting has to just use 5 colours. I mean that even if you have lots of colours, you want to restrict the amount of colours you use to your painting. I'm going to point the camera downwards now. I'm going to look at a photograph and I'm going to show you the thought process that I go through when choosing the colours to paint with. Now, this isn't a strategy that I, handcuff myself to as I go through the painting. It's not a specific amount of colours that I choose. That will depend on the subject. Could be as little as 3, could be as many as 10. And if I get part way through the painting and I really feel I have to add another colour in, then I will. But it's so much better to approach it this way and to try to limit your colours to a specific palette than it is to randomly dip in and out of lots and lots of different colours. And you're going to find this strategy much easier if you're using tubes. Of course, it can be done with pans too. But if you've got a set of pan paints, particularly a large set that's got 20 or 30 colours, there is a tendency, particularly for beginners, just to dip in and out of every random colour. What I like to do is write the colours I've chosen down the side of my drawing board and then stick to them as far as I can through the painting. So let's look now at how I choose the colours. So I've got a little photo here. I'm actually going to do this on YouTube, possibly next week. I want to do some step-by-step tutorials that are smaller things. So rather than doing full paintings, I just want to do, a flower, a leaf, other small objects so that you can just get the hang of painting things without having to do a full painting. However, when I look at this now, I really feel like doing a background tutorial as well. Let me know in the comments if you'd like both background tutorial and flower tutorial. I would do them separately and possibly not in that order, but we'll see. So when I start with a photograph like this, I'm immediately thinking, what colours would I use? And when I look at this, I don't see a very large colour palette here. I'm pretty sure I only need one pink or one red. What else have I got? I've got green here. Now, if I had a pink that wasn't sort of purple enough in places, because you can see it's very rose in places, but then it goes almost magenta in places, what I could do is pick a bright pink or a crimson red, and I could add a light blue. So if I added a blue, possibly like phthalo or cerulean, I could use that to get all of these purplish bits here, these lilac tones, and then I could also use it to make a green. I would need a yellow too. Now, when you mix blue, red and yellow together, you will get grey. So I could also use that combination of colours to get the shadows on the petals. However, because I've got a lot of ready-made greens, I may choose not to mix my own green at all, in which case I would start with a crimson pink or a rose. I need something that's got very, very strong colour. I don't want to have to use two colours to get the light and the dark part here. So because it's watercolour, I can start with a very strong pigment and go down to a more watery pigment. I've got the green here. Now, when I mix green and pink together, again, I'm going to get sort of a brownish colour, a brownish grey and neutral, which I could use to get my shadowy areas and some of these areas here that are a little bit more muted. I've also got the brown here on the trunk. Now, although it's possible to mix brown, it really is usually not very satisfactory. So I'm going to include at least one earth colour, but this isn't a strong colour here. I would like it to have some kind of range. I could choose something like a raw umber, but if I chose something like a sepia that was a bit stronger, I'd also be able to get darks in places. Now, of the colours that I choose for this, I want to make sure that I have one or two colours that are strong staining colours, because otherwise, where I've got these very strong darks, I just won't be able to get them if all my colours are quite pale and wishy-washy. So if I've chosen a few pale colours, I want to make sure that I have one or two that are deep and strong. Looking down here, I might also choose a yellow. Now, it's not a very warm yellow, but of course, where we have slightly warmer areas where it goes kind of orangish, brownish here, I could mix my yellow with my pink and make some warm colours. So I would pick maybe 4 or 5 colours, I would swatch them together, I would mix them and see what colours I could make, and those are the colours I would start with. Now, because I have some linear details on here, I'd probably also choose at least one watercolour pencil. Now, if you want to know the exact colours that I end up choosing for this picture, do watch the video tutorial that's coming up in a couple of weeks. If you're watching this video, it's already been up 2 years or something like that, then you'll find the tutorial for this magnolia bud in my step-by-step playlist. Once I had chosen my paints, I put them out next to me. I wouldn't have all of my paints out. Of course, if you have pan paints, you don't have that luxury. I tend to use tubes, so I would just keep those ones out on the desk. I'd write the names of them down and I'd start going through the painting. Now, you can still do it with pan paints. You'll just have to make sure that you're quite disciplined, not going into lots of other colours. If I got to a point in the painting and I said to myself, oh, I need this kind of dark, dull green here. None of the other colours here are mixing this colour. I really can't do it. Then that's the stage when I would think about bringing in a different blue, a different yellow to mix these greens, or even if I was using a ready-made green, a different green. So it's not a matter of this is the amount of colours I'm starting with and I cannot deviate from this. It's simply a matter of using as few colours as possible If you try and do it as you go through the painting, I guarantee you'll end up with too many. So try choosing your colours at the beginning and sticking to them as far as you can. It's going to give everything its own atmosphere, its own mood. There's no right set of colours for this picture. There are lots of choices, and making those choices are what will make this painting unique to me and my artistic personality. As always, can I pop in quickly and ask if you're getting value from this video, if it's useful to you, can you please click the like button, the little thumbs up symbol? It just helps the YouTube algorithm to push this video out to more people. If you like, share, subscribe, or leave me a comment, more people will see this video and I'll be able to teach more people how to paint and draw. Now, talking of colours, let's talk about darkening colours. Now, I have a separate video all about how to create really interesting, lovely, strong darks and how to get stronger colours on your paper. I'll link to that one in the description of this video. But meantime, let's talk about darkening your colours. If you're a beginner, you may have got into the bad habit of shoving black into everything, or perhaps you've learned that, that's not a good idea. So you're using something like Payne's grey, burnt umber, neutral tint. I had one lady who actually used to use raw umber in everything. Now, raw umber's not a particularly dark colour. It's a very useful colour. It's sort of the colour of light coloured wood, but whenever she needed a grey, a neutral, a shadow, she would reach for that colour and ended up sort of polluting all her paints with it. You never want to have a formula for your darks. You never want to think to yourself, I've got this neutral tint. Whenever I need to darken a colour, I'll put that in it. What it does is it dulls all of your colours. Now, there's nothing wrong with neutral tint, there's nothing wrong with raw umber, but you want to be thinking about keeping your colours clean, about using lovely strong darks, avoiding black wherever you can. There's very little actual black in nature. Now, I wouldn't say 100% never use black. It is in the middle of poppies and on zebra stripes. I do like it for the pupils of animals' eyes, but generally speaking, do not default to one colour for darkening all of your colours. You need to learn a little bit more about colour mixing. I've got lots of videos on this channel that will help you with that. And if you need any specific colour mixing videos, do ask me in the comments. Something else that definitely contributes to overworking is not getting your values right the first time. So what do I mean by that? Now, you might be sort of going through a painting, putting in some lights, some midtones, some darks. And when you first put them in, they look just right. But then as the paint dries, it gets a little bit lighter. As you go through the painting, you start to put stronger colours in. And all of a sudden, those colours that you put in first of all, those areas of tone, they just don't look dark enough, or they look too dark. So you're forced to try and overpaint things or scrub things out. When you overpaint them, you don't necessarily get the paint in exactly the same area. So you end up getting these kind of overlapped edges. These scruffy edges. It can lead to this lack of freshness and this look of overworking. Now, if you're working from a photograph, there's nothing wrong with adjusting the values. So there's nothing wrong with saying to yourself, well, I like that, but I'd like that to be darker. That's fine. But if you're a complete beginner, then it doesn't hurt to go by the values that are already in the painting before you try and sort of freestyle. So I'm going to show you a way of getting your values right first time round. So let's say I'm doing this painting and I want to do some green here. I know a colour that I think will work for it. So do I go ahead and put it straight on my paper? Because I might find later on that the colour's not right or that the tone is not dark enough, and tones can be very deceptive. So there's a few things I need to do. First of all, I need to swatch that colour before it goes anywhere near my painting. I'm going to swatch it on a piece of paper. Once I've swatched it on that piece of paper, I'm going to let it dry. Now, this is important with watercolours because watercolours dry lighter. And even if you're working in a different medium, such as acrylics or gouache, you may find that that dries darker, dries lighter, whatever, but watercolours tend to dry lighter, and they can dry up to 50% lighter. So I'm going to let the swatch dry, and then I'm going to start checking the tone. Now, I do have a full video about tonal values and many ways that you can get them right. I'll link to that in the description of this video. So what I've got here is I've got a piece of card and I've just cut with a scalpel. I've cut out a square. I haven't even bothered to draw it in straight lines. It's just a scruffy square. What this is going to do is it's going to allow me to isolate an area. So I can isolate this area of green here and get it next to some white. And then look at that. You can see that it's much darker and duller than the colour I've got here. Another place that you may go wrong is areas that look almost white. So if we look at this petal here, we've got pink down here and then the petal fades up to white. At least that's what my brain is telling me. So let's put some white around it. And there you can see it actually has a fairly strong greyish lilac colour. And we can do this anywhere on our picture and start to see what the colour actually looks like. If I'm looking at this part here, is it pink? Is it kind of lilac, or does it actually look red? If I can't tell because I'm being affected by the things around it, or I can't tell how dark it is, and look at that, it's a lot darker than you would imagine, then we'll isolate it by placing a piece of white paper around it. And this technique is going to allow you to see how dark colours really are. Look at the background here. It's a light background, isn't it? Or is it? Maybe not. Now, one of the reasons that beginners so often have trouble with overworking paintings is that they make so many mistakes and they get so many drying lines that they then try to adjust. This is all about not understanding how to control the paint. Now, it's far beyond the scope of this video for me to teach you how to control your paint, how to stop you from getting backruns. Luckily for you, I already have lots of videos on those sort of things on this channel. Have a look in the tips and techniques playlist. But I do have a couple of strategies for you. Now, if this is something that is happening to you all the time and that you've started out as a beginner, you're trying to do quite large paintings or quite big subjects, you're pretty much ruining everything, you need to stop and slow down. You need to go back to simple practicing of techniques, and you need to do much smaller things. So instead of trying to paint a garden full of flowers and bushes and trees, just paint a single flower, a single leaf. You always want to default to still life. It's always the best thing to start practicing from before you try those more difficult subjects. If you do want a really structured approach to learning how to control your paint, flat washes, graduated washes, all of that good stuff, I have an entire watercolor beginners course. That's one of my paid ones. You can find out all about that in the video description. But as I said, I've also got lots of free information on this YouTube channel. The main thing to remember is don't just keep trying to do huge paintings. If you've no idea how to control the paint, if everything's getting ruined and overworked, it's just going to leave you disheartened. It's all about water levels and learning how to control the paint. So take some time just to get to know the medium before you launch yourself into large paintings. Now, no matter how careful or how experienced you are, there will be some times when you need to adjust your paint layers. In other words, you need to put more paint on top of paint that you've already put on, and that you do need to adjust what's already there. But there are ways of doing this without getting into a murky, muddy mess and making everything look overworked. One of the ways that people get this wrong is they try and adjust layers of paint while they're still damp. But there are several good reasons why you need to let the paint dry first. Let me talk to you about gum arabic. So I've got some bottles of gum arabic here. This one is by Jackman's, this little one here, and this one is by De La Roni, and you can see that it's kind of it's like a sticky liquid. Now, this is sold as a separate medium. If you want to know what you can use it for, it's great stuff. I've got videos about that. I'll try to link to that in the video description as well. But I'm not talking about using it separately here. This is in your paints. It's in almost all brands of paints. And why? Because it's a natural adhesive. So something that's not spoken about very often is the fact that this stuff actually helps to stick your pigment to the paper. Now, we know that watercolors can be disturbed when you put another layer on top and you can lift them out, but that doesn't change the fact that there is glue in them, because this is a natural glue. It's a natural water-soluble glue. It comes from the acacia tree, but it helps to some extent to adhere your paint to the paper. So here's some green that I've painted. Let's paint some more next to it, the exact same color. I'm not sure what this color is. I think it may be a chrome oxide green. Let's put it on like that. Now, what happens if I put this paint on and then I decide that it's not bright enough actually? I'd like to adjust it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a layer of Daniel Smith green gold over the top. So I'm going to make it brighter. Green gold is a bright, transparent colour. So it's going to be really helpful in brightening my colour up. So what people tend to do is they tend to go in while this first layer is still wet and they start painting on like this. Now, this can leave a very uneven looking result. You may not match up the edges exactly. You may leave paint puddles and get drying lines. And the wet paint that goes on second may bleed and end up leaving drying lines and marks. Now, what is far preferable to do is to go on top of dry paint. I'm going to paint gently so we don't disturb those underneath layers too much. I'm going to be aided by the gum arabic, which has dried, adhering this paint to the paper, and I'm taking that layer of green gold over the top. And what we're ending up with is a layer that's brightened and has been adjusted, but doesn't noticeably look like I've painted on it twice, as compared to this one here, which is going to dry patchy and uneven. So for my next tip, let me ask you a question. Do you take regular breaks from your paintings? Because all professionals do. We don't sort of put our head down and, position ourselves 8 inches from our paper and keep drawing, painting, and never stepping back to ask ourselves what it actually needs next. And this can be a habit that you get into, and it almost becomes, I've done it myself when I first started painting, almost becomes this kind of fever, doesn't it? You're in the middle of a painting and it's just like, oh, it's all going wrong. I've got to keep adjusting it. Let me just concentrate. It's all going wrong. At this point, I just want to get it finished. This is a really bad approach. Not only do you need to let your painting dry regularly so that things don't bleed and that you can overpaint areas cleanly and easily, but you just need to step back and look sometimes. You can't get a really good idea of how your picture's looking when you're 8 inches away from it, or in my case, if I've taken my glasses off because I'm short-sighted at 4 inches away from it. Sometimes you just need to place it on a shelf and step back. Sometimes you just need to go out for a walk, have a cup of tea, leave it for an hour, even leave it overnight if you're really not sure what it needs next. Trust me, once you step away from a painting and look at it with fresh eyes, you are going to see things that you never imagined you could see before. You're going to see areas of drama, areas of impact. You're going to see things that are looking underwhelming. You're going to see mistakes that you've made that you didn't even know were there. It's going to make everything much clearer. Take regular breaks. Don't get yourself caught up in that sort of mid-painting, I must get this finished. Unless you're in an art class and you're on a timed limit, take a break. This next one, in my opinion, is a huge cause of overworking, and that's putting in shadows too early. So I'm going to point the camera downwards in a moment and show you one of the paintings that I'm working on myself. And I've actually done another video all about this, if I can find it, because I've got over 250 on this channel now. If I can find that video, I'll link it in the video description, and it goes through this process of adding strong shadows at the end. Now, there are some shadows that you might need to add as you go through because you want a wet into wet effect, but there are some that you absolutely need to leave to the end, because if you put them in too early, what's going to happen is you're going to get to the end of your painting, you're going to look at those shadows, you're going to realize that they're not strong enough, because until you've got all of the colors on the paper, if you've got areas where you've still got lots of white paper, it's going to skew your ability to judge how dark a color is. You're going to put your shadows in too light. As I said, you get to the end, you need to adjust them, you're going to overpaint them. If you don't paint that neatly, what's going to happen is you're going to get a shadow with multiple edges. When you have really strong shadows, like on a bright sunny day, this just doesn't happen. Your shadows need to be strong and punchy. You need to take a risk and throw them in at the end really dark. Let me show you a painting I'm working on at the moment and the decisions I'm making. So here's a painting I'm working on currently. I've pretty much recently started it. I've done the drawing, put some of the lighter colours in and a little bit of sky behind here. And I've put this yellow pot in. Now you see this pot and some of these other areas have very strong hard edge shadows. Also here, this is what you would generally see in bright sunshine. Now you'll notice that I've put the yellow pot in, but I haven't done those very strong shadows. I haven't done this shadow here, and yet it's quite important to the picture. I'm going to leave that until the end. But if you have a look here, I'm starting to put some of these light greenish yellow plants in. I'm actually using 2 different greens here and a yellow. And what I'm going to do is start putting these in, varying between the light areas and the darker ones. I've got this darker green here, and what I'm going to do is, as I go through, I'm going to put some shadow in there, and typically the shadow would be most dense and seen most easily down behind the plants that are growing in front. So I can take this shadow area down here and then bring it up. So I'm not leaving every bit of shadow to the end, because there are areas where I might want shadow like this that's blended and isn't all hard edged. But those very strong shadows, particularly on man-made items like pathways and houses, I'm going to leave those until the end, and I won't be putting that strong shadow on that yellow pot until the end of the painting. If you want to see how this one turns out, you'll be able to check it out either in my Facebook group or my Instagram. So let's talk now about the problem that everybody has when it comes to overworking, and that's getting towards the end of the painting and thinking, Is it finished? Isn't it finished? I quite like it, but there's a few areas I'm not that happy with. I'm worried if I carry on, I'm going to overwork it. So first of all, you need to implement the strategy I talked about earlier on, which is leaving it alone. And if you've got to the stage where you're not sure it's finished or not, I advise you just to leave it overnight and look at it the next day. Now, saying that you've gone back to look at it the next day and you do think it needs something else, I want you only to adjust one thing, and that's tonal contrast. If you've already got paint on every area of your painting, all you need to worry about at the end is the drama, the punchiness, the tonal contrast. Getting strong tonal contrast will never make things look overworked. So you're looking at mostly darkening dark areas or going stronger. And if you're careful, if you've allowed things to dry, you should be able to adjust those things without losing clarity. And if you've kept your colours pure, it's going to make it easier for you. You might also want to make some areas lighter, possibly by lifting or scrubbing out. Be careful with this because you know that if you scrub at your paper too much, you may ruin the surface. So that's up to you to know, what quality your paper is and how it's going to react to lifting out. You can try lifting some areas out carefully. I have other videos on this channel that will show you how to do that. I'll try and link one of them in the description of this video. And so you can do a little bit of lifting out if you need to. And you certainly can darken areas carefully if you need to. And that's all you should be really adjusting at the end of your painting is the tonal contrast. So remember, there's no right or wrong amount of time to spend on a painting. There's no right or wrong amount of times to go back in and to layer. Take your time, be intentional, keep your colours clean and let things dry. And just a footnote to this video, those of you who keep asking me why I have swords in the house, it's because my hobby is martial arts training. These are Kung Fu broadswords known as Dao. Of course, they're just training ones. I did ask my ex-boyfriend actually to buy me a real one, but for some reason he wasn't keen on the idea. Before you leave this video, don't forget to have a look in the video description. I've got lots of free stuff down there for you. I've got free downloadable PDF guides that you can grab for no money whatsoever. I've even got a free watercolor painting course that you can take. You can also find out all about my paid courses if you're looking for something a little bit more structured. If you enjoyed this video, you can watch another one of my watercolor painting videos right now.